Hi, this is Frank Schallenberger coming back to you again with part two of this series, Disease is Optional. In this particular part, we're going to look at how mitochondrial function is measured and some of the other aspects about it. Basically, we're going to cover how bioenergy testing measures mitochondrial function. Bioenergy testing is a system that I developed some and patented some, say, 20 years ago. I've used it on thousands of patients, so I have an abundance of experience with it. And I've learned basically how mitochondria can not only be measured, but how they can be optimized. And that, by the way, is the key to making disease optional. We're going to talk about when you should measure your mitochondrial function. We're going to talk about how you match your lifestyle to your mitochondrial genetics and about the role that the mitochondrial genetics play. We're going to discuss how if your mitochondrial function is great, then your lifestyle is matching well. You're doing good. And just all you have to do is just stay on your game and check it every 1 to 2 years, make sure it stays that way. Also, if it's not great, if it's suboptimal, let's not be satisfied with that. Let's make it optimal, because that's going to be the secret to preventing disease. So in the next few videos, I'm going to show you how you can use the data from your bioenergy testing to determine how to improve and how to optimize your mitochondrial function. But for right now, let's just look at how do we optimize mitochondrial function. Well, remember, your mitochondria, what they're doing is they're processing oxygen. And when they process oxygen, they process it into energy and carbon dioxide. So here's what we do. I'll put a mask on you, similar to a scuba mask. And you're breathing through that mask. And it's connected to an analyzer, which is analyzing how much oxygen you're consuming and how much carbon dioxide you're putting out. And by looking at those numbers and the ratio of those numbers, I'll get into this a little bit more in a few minutes, but by looking at those numbers, I can determine not how efficiently your mitochondria are working. If they're working great, fine. If they're not, we can also use the data provided by the test to determine what you can do to optimize your mitochondrial function. So this is kind of how it works. All that oxygen that you're taking in is only doing one thing. That is, it's being processed in your mitochondria into energy. So if I know how much oxygen you can process, I know how many mitochondria you have. That's important because one of the things that happens to us as we have bad lifestyles and just getting older, one of the things that happens to us is that the mitochondria decrease in number. We don't have as many of them, so we can't make as much energy because we don't have as many of the little critters to make the energy with. So here's how you do it. We put a thing kind of like a scuba mask on you, and as you're breathing through that mask, it's connected to an analyzer that's going to measure oxygen and carbon dioxide. And what's going to happen is we put you on a bicycle and we make you work progressively harder and harder. And as you're working harder and harder on that bicycle, you have to have more energy. So your mitochondria have to use more and more oxygen to crank out that energy. And the technician is monitoring that on the screen. And you can see your oxygen consumption going up, 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 just constantly. Well, at some point, that's going to level off. And at that point, the technician says, okay, you can stop now. And that's the point that we measure, because that point is telling me what's the maximum amount of energy this person's body can actually produce from oxygen. What's the maximum amount of oxygen they can process? And that's directly related to how many mitochondria they have. The more oxygen you can process, the more mitochondria you have. And then what I can do is I can take that number and I can compare it to what's usual and typical for the average healthy 40-year-old. Now, why am I using 40-year-old as a comparison? Well, I don't actually use 40-year-old as a comparison for people younger than 40. So if you're 35 and you do this test, I'm going to compare you to the average 35-year-older. But what I do use is, as people get older and they get in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, I'm always comparing them back to a 40-year-old database. Reason being is, if you're 75 years old, I don't want you to be healthy for the average 75-year-older. I want you to be healthy for the average 40-year-older. That's my goal. That way we reduce your risk of disease to that's typical of a 40-year-old. So all the time you're getting compared to a 40-year-old database. So the amount of oxygen you're consuming tells me how many mitochondria you have compared to the average healthy 40-year-old. The other thing that we're measuring in there is the amount of carbon dioxide that you're producing as you consume that oxygen. The reason we measure that is because carbon dioxide tells us a lot. In other words, the efficiency of the mitochondria is determined by how much carbon dioxide is produced for the oxygen consumed. So we look at that ratio. It works like this. The more carbon dioxide you're breathing out, the more you're excreting, the more that's being produced by your oxygen metabolism, the less efficient your mitochondria are. Conversely, the less carbon dioxide you're putting out, the more efficient your mitochondria are. So we can also compare those ratios to what's typical for a 40-year-old. So 1, I can determine how many mitochondria you have. 2, I can determine how efficiently they're working. And we want them to be working as good as the average 40-year-old, no matter what age you are, unless you're under 40. That's how it's done. It's a pretty simple, easy process. And so knowing that, when's a good time to have your mitochondrial function measured? Ideally, in a perfect world, when your 40th birthday hits, you should get your mitochondrial function measured. Why is that? It's because I published a study some 20 odd years ago after doing this for quite a while, and I determined, we published this study. We looked at 40 young people, all of whom were healthy. They were all younger than 40, and we looked at their mitochondrial function, and it was pretty surprising. 46% of them already, even in their 30s, 46% already had decreased mitochondrial function. Now you can imagine, of the 40 people that we looked at, which one of that group is going to get sick first? It's going to be the ones with the poor mitochondrial function, even in their 30s. So here's the thing about mitochondrial function. You don't know it's poor when it's poor. You don't know until it's too late and you come down with the disease. You might feel perfectly well and still have very poor mitochondrial function. The only way you'll know is if you measure it. So ideally, it would be a great time to measure it when you're 40 years old. That'll set a standard for you. If it's poor, like it was in some of these people, well, okay, you stand forewarned. Let's do something about it right now. Why wait? If it's not, it can serve as a benchmark, and we can compare it back as you get older and make sure that no matter how old you get, you're as good as that benchmark. So a good time to do it is when you're 40. But look, if you're 55, 60, 70, even if you're 80 right now, it's okay to measure it. In fact, you should measure it at any age because you want to know where you stand. Now, the other day I had a married couple come in, for example. The man was 84. The woman was 10 years younger. And the man's mitochondrial efficiency was excellent. He had the mitochondrial efficiency of somebody a little bit younger than 40 years old. Fantastic for an 84-year-old man. But she did not do nearly so well. She's 10 years younger. You would have thought she would have done better, but she didn't. She only had 74% efficiency rating. And here's the thing. They both felt great. There's no way that you can determine that your mitochondria are great just because you feel good. That's, I like to make an analogy to blood pressure. It's quite common to have, pretty high blood pressure, enough to cause a problem, and feel perfectly good. The only way you're going to know is if somebody checks your blood pressure and says, oh yeah, by the way, your blood pressure's high. Because you can feel great and still have high blood pressure. After a while, it's going to get you. Mitochondrial function's like that too. You can have very poor mitochondrial function, be well on the road to disease, and feel perfectly great. The only way you're going to know is like this woman I just mentioned. You got to get it measured. So no matter how old you are, get your mitochondrial function measured. In the future, one of these videos, I'm going to tell you how you can do that and where you can do that and all that. But get it measured. If it's like that 84-year-old man, if it's optimal, fine. I don't have to tell him anything except you're doing a great job. Your lifestyle is matching up great with your mitochondrial genetics. Just keep doing what you're doing. Let me see you in a year, and we'll just monitor this as you get older just to make sure you're on your game. Likewise with the woman, that was good too, because we learned that she is on the road to disease. She feels great. Actually, she looked great, but she was on the road to disease. So we're going to intervene, and we're going to use the data from the bioenergy test to determine what she needs to do to match her lifestyle up with her genetics, because right now they're not matched. So that's the goal. Match your lifestyle to your genetics. How you do that is by measuring your mitochondria using this technique that I just mentioned. And then you just keep monitoring. Once you get it optimal, you know at that point you're not going to get sick. You just want to keep it that way. So we may check in maybe every 1 or 2 years to make sure that it's staying good and that there's nothing we have to do. So in the next few videos, I'm going to show you how to you can use that data to actually determine how to improve and optimize your mitochondrial function. And in part 3 coming up, we're going to specifically discuss the importance of thyroid hormone function in all of this. So I'll see you there.